In this video, I want to talk with you about being used correctly with your partner, specifically being used by God correctly with your partner. When I was a kid, I remember that my mom broke down one time and was crying and telling me that she was so afraid that she was going to leave us behind. And my mom had other issues that she was dealing with as well in her own sin. But one of the things that was holding her back in her faith walk, as she was telling me, is that she was afraid that she was going to leave her kids behind. And my sisters and I were really struggling. We were really struggling because we had come out of my dad's house, been removed from my dad's house. And by that time, we had a lot of stuff that we did not know how to heal from. And my mom didn't know what to do. It wasn't all her fault. It wasn't all because of her sin, what she was dealing with us. In fact, a lot of it had to do with the damage that my dad had created. But my mom chose that partner. She chose that husband. And there was a lot of her own idolatry and her own sin that factored into that. And so I know that if my mom had dealt with her sin and she had repented and she had looked at the mistakes that she had made, that God would have restored her and he would have taught her how to help her children, how to understand her children, and that he would have worked in us alongside my mother, because I've watched that happen in my own situation with my daughter and I've watched it happen in others. So my mom ended up stuck in her own fallacy of control. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because when we lean on our own understanding and we get stuck in our own heartbreak and our own pain and anger and fear, it starts to cause or compel us to behave in ways that God has not told us to. So for example, we might start coddling our partner because we think, well, if I separate from my partner to go isolate in God, if I separate from my partner to go and be with the body, if I separate from my partner, who will talk to them? Who will correct them? They're going to go even further down this hole. And so we start babysitting our partners and we start making them an idol, and we allow them to make us an idol, and we accommodate to them when we should be actually doing other things with God. When what we should be doing is giving God the space, not interfering in what God is doing in our partner to bring them low. There are natural consequences and natural results that happen when we start living a godly life. God is going to work in our children and he's going to work in our spouse. But you have to understand that there's going to be this sort of response burst. Initially, what's going to happen is that person is they're going to be upset. I didn't sign up for this. You're abandoning me. You're choosing them over me. We had a person recently who fed into that with their spouse. And instead of admitting to it, instead of leaning into God and asking him, how do you want me to be used with my husband? This person made excuses to just excuse themselves right out of their covenant. And they left the body. There were some other things going on with them. They were still practicing medicine, but this factored into it. They got a lot of flack from their husband and they fed into it instead of figuring out, what do I need to do with God? And it may just have cost them their salvation. Paul says in the word that from now on we need to live as though we don't have a husband or wife. What Paul is not saying is be inconsiderate, don't fulfill your commitments to them, your covenant, your obligations, don't love them. He's not saying any of that. What he's saying is, he said it within the context of being single-minded for God. And if you're doing that, if you're single-minded for God every single day, you're my husband, Lord. This is my earthly husband, but you're my first husband. And so the ways I behave with my earthly husband are going to directly come out of my relationship with you, which means that I need to be in isolation with you the majority of the time. In order to be single-minded for you, I need to not be carried away by my heartbreak, my pain, my anger, my fear that's causing me to behave in ways that are not even helping my partner, that are actually idolatry. Now I'm going to have to deal with my own idolatry, my own what the world calls codependence, which, by the way, codependence in the world seems to be this language, this concept, this construct that is normalized. So let's call it what it is. It's idolatry. And when you call it idolatry, then you know how to deal with it. It doesn't become some disease that you have to keep that you have to keep fighting. If you're fighting something, the devil's probably involved, guys. If you have something that is preoccupying you that you keep fighting, like an anxiety attack, a PTSD attack, alcoholism, addiction, codependence, all of these things that they say in their disease model. Oh, this is a syndrome and a condition and a disease. You're going to have it for the rest of your life. You're always going to be fighting it. No, God has not set you apart for that. Thank you very much. It is idolatry when you deal with the idolatry and return to God and you ask him, how do you want to use me? That codependence is going to go away. You won't be fighting it for the rest of your life. Now, if you isolate, your partner's going to have to isolate, and they might actually hear from God. If you stop entertaining them and allowing them to use you in a way that is totally inappropriate in an idolatrous marriage or relationship, they're actually going to have to go fill their time. And if God has joined you with them, then when you stop that pattern of idolatry, God's going to work in them. You have to know that. You have to believe that it is God's motivation for you to be brought together as one and for them to be saved through you. But you have to do your part. And that means that you cannot be used to entertain your partner. You cannot be used in a relationship in which your partner is constantly emotionally draining you or trying to threaten you back into the status quo. You're going to have to change the status quo. And in order to do that, you're going to have to be brought into this understanding that you are to be used by God, not trying to control the outcomes, not you trying to save that person, because you don't save anything. You can't even save yourself. You need to be used by God by not standing in the way of God. And so what you do is you allow consequences that God has given. Deal with your own sin. Withhold from yourself. Yes, it would be so nice to just go lose yourself in your partner, to go and veg out watching movies and having date night and all these other things. But listen, if God has called you to a particular life, you go live that life. You're not of the world anymore. And so don't allow your partner to be used to seduce and entice you back into what your flesh wants. You've been called out of the world, guys. Now let me tell you what's going to happen. These partners who are saying, you're leaving me behind. If you don't succumb to that, what do you think they're going to do? They might get a little curious about what you're doing. Why don't you come with me? Why don't you also read the Bible? Why don't you also spend some time with God? You're leaving me behind. Do you understand the battle that's going on? What is Satan doing through that partner? Rather than them being restored, rather than them being prepared to actually be in the body and with God, Satan is trying to guilt you back into a dynamic of idolatry. He may even trick you with certain language. Well, you've been made one with this person, so you should go be with them. And you need to know the word. You need to be able to come against that the way Jesus did by saying, no, God has told me that I need to hate everyone else before him. I need to put God first. And he will be the one to lead my partner. And he will be the one to lead me on who to be with my partner. If your partner's been separated from the body, if your partner does not want to be with the body, let them deal with their consequences. Because that feeling of being left behind, if you don't feed into it, eventually God is going to stir up something in that person so that they'll do what's necessary in order to be where you are. Wouldn't you do the same with your partner? If something was so important to them that it took you away from them, wouldn't you start to be a little curious about what's going on over there? Why is this so important? Maybe you might even start to pray to God and ask him, if you're real, will you show me, tell me what's going on here? What has enamored my spouse that I no longer have their attention? That is okay, guys, by the way. It's okay that your spouse no longer has your attention, because if they're not living a godly life, they have become unattractive to you, and maybe they'll be motivated to be attractive to you. Maybe that's what God will use in order to stir them towards godliness. But if you keep allowing their worldliness to be what's attractive to you, for them to attract you with all of the tricks that they used before, why would they be motivated to be anything else? When you start feeling like something else has your spouse's attention, you're gonna wanna understand how to get that attention back. And you can let them know as God moves you to let them know. I want a godly life, and you've chosen not to live a godly life. And so this is creating separation between us. If you want to bridge the gap, you're going to have to step over here. You're going to have to pursue what I'm pursuing because I no longer pursue what you are pursuing. And I'm no longer going to meet you there. Do you understand how that might stir something up in your spouse? If someone said that to you and you really wanted them and you were longing for that connection, you might resist it at first. But if they stood firm, eventually you'd go check it out. Eventually you'd start doing the work because it would get awfully lonely on that other side. And if you are doing this in God, because we're not just talking about some behavioral manipulation and that you can manipulate results. What I'm saying is you need to do your part. And if you are being used by God to do your part, to take that firm stance, no, I don't live as the world does anymore. I can't meet you there anymore. I love you, but you've made a decision that you don't want to be where I am. And so we're not in agreement. We don't have that harmony between us anymore. And there is a limit to where we can go from here. So you're either going to have to step over here where I am, or you're going to have to continue to deal with the pain of what this separation is causing. Because I'm not going to budge. I know the truth now, and I'm never turning back. I'm not going to put my hand to the plow and look back because you choose to stay back there. Did Lot stop and go with his wife? Did he turn back because she turned back? Some of you are going to have to accept the fact that your spouse may turn into a pillar of salt, that they may have to reap the consequences of what they're choosing right now. But if you don't do what you are called to do, which is put your hand to the plow and not look back, you are going to drown with them. But if you do this, I know that God will testify. I know that he will give your spouse the opportunity to step over that line, to bridge that gap and join you. He's going to move things. He has not placed you in that marriage in vain, but you're going to have to deal with your own sin. You're going to have to withhold from your own desires. You're going to have to allow the consequences that God has given. You're going to have to deal with the issues that you have. And maybe you had parents who made you take care of them. And maybe now you're in a relationship with a person who you didn't realize makes you take care of them. You're going to have to deal with the anxiety that is raised when they start pulling for you to take care of them. They may even get angry. They might throw adult tantrums. They might do all kinds of things. And you're going to have to realize that just as that anxiety is coming from you and your past, that anger, those tantrums are coming from something in their past. You go deal with yours, they'll be forced to deal with theirs. Be honest about what's coming up in you. What are your fears? What's going on? Write them down. Usually when you write them down, you start to realize, oh, these feelings and these fears and these thoughts that I have in my mind are not even coming from the current relationship. Some of them might be, but most of them are coming from somewhere else that needs to be resolved. Please bring this message to God. I know that it's a little hard to notice right away. Please ask God, does this message apply to me?